Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Joanne Graser and I am on the PMA Board of Directors. And I am so lucky today to be joined by John Steele, who is the author of one of my favorite books. And I'm sure a lot of you have read it at least once. I'm into my second time through it now. Caged Lion, Joseph Pilates and His Legacy. I'm here today with John to talk about the book, some of his anecdotes, and some things that he and I got to talk about last weekend when we had a chat. So welcome, John. I'm so glad you're here.
Joanne, it's such a pleasure to be here and, be involved with the PMA. That's also a great thing and has been for me. That's what started the book back in 2007 when I was the keynote speaker at a early PMA convention. So here we all are, and it's great. Thank you.
Here we are. And I'm super honored to be part of your whirlwind book tour. You've been on a lot. It's been great. Every interview you've given has unpacked other things, wonderful little tidbits and stuff. So I'm hoping to do that for our audience today. So let me first start off with sort of a more general and broad question. So tell me about your motivation in writing this book and what you want the Pilates community as a whole to take away from it.
Okay, sure. That's two very big and quite different questions. The motivation actually is hard for me to kind of, put that back together again. I was very honored to be invited to speak, to be the keynote speaker at the PMA convention in 2007. And when I prepared for that, and then when I left it, I had this kind of, it was a sad feeling, really, about where was Joseph Pilates in Pilates. He seemed to be forgotten. There was only, in the audience, which was about 300 or 400 professionals, teachers, there was only about a quarter of them knew he was a person and had died actually 40 years before. So I kind of had this sad feeling that he was left out. I didn't really know what to do about it at the time. There were people there that said, hey, these stories are great. Why don't you write a book? Well, I'd never thought of writing a book. And I also was practicing law full time. This was just sort of a thing I did to make this talk. So I kind of let that fester around and started fiddling around with it, writing, and was having trouble. But the motivation was kind of to get the stories down on paper, get them somewhere, and bring Joseph back into the picture of Pilates and the history of it. So, I went online, I looked up Joseph Pilates, and there were all these stories, and they were all the same. And I said, this couldn't be the real story, but there was nothing about him as a person. There was this little cryptic history, and he did this, and he was a boxer there, and he went to England, and he was incarcerated. But you didn't get any sense of him, and there wasn't really anyone around to do it. There were first-generation teachers still alive, Lola and Kathy Grant and Mary Bowen. Ron Fletcher, he knew her. But he knew Joe, but they all knew him as a teacher, as the inventor of Pilates. They didn't know him personally, and I did know him personally. Although the more I thought about it, I didn't know him very well. I didn't think I did. So I thought I'd, start to get it down on paper. And that's what motivated me to write the book. Now, the second question is what I'd like the profession to take from this. Is that a fair summary of the question, Joanne?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, as I wrote the book and as I thought about Joe, I started to realize, consciously, what he had given me as part of the way he taught contrology, and what he gave me as the incentive to do it, the motivation to do contrology. And I thought that would be very important for teachers to kind of focus on. What was it about how Joe taught that at least hooked a sufficient number of people that contrology would survive, that he left something with everyone? What did he do in that area that kept it going? And how did he teach, and what it was like back then? I thought all of that was very historically important. And I also thought there were nuggets of almost genius in it. So that's, and the more I wrote the book and the more I dug into and tried to figure out for myself, why did I go back and why did I stay with it and why did I continue to try to perpetuate it? I wasn't a teacher, it wasn't my business. Why did I do all this? I thought that would be important, and of course in that inquiry I started to say, well, what is there about contrology, Pilates? What's there that's attracted all these people quite suddenly after a long period of gestation here, I guess. But so all of that became important to me as an author to write, and I thought, wow, I think that'll be very helpful to the profession and interesting. I mean, that's why.
Yeah. So let me back up a little bit for a moment. I know that your parents were instrumental in getting you into the studio the first time, and I know from that beginning part of the book you weren't particularly enamored after your first session. But can you tell the audience a little bit about what role your parents played in getting you into the studio, and maybe a little bit about their relationship with Joe Pilates and how they got started with him?
Yeah, my mother got there through a friend of hers who had been a choreographer and a dancer, although wasn't at the time. But she was a college friend of my mother's, and they remained friendly. And my mother went there because of her. And my parents were both attracted to sort of offbeat stuff. They were a little offbeat people. They liked different things. My mother was always very proud of the fact she was sort of ahead of the curve on stuff, and socially it was important. And so she went, and was immediately hooked by Joe. I mean, to the point where it was, for me, her son, very embarrassing, because at dinner parties, all she talked about was this man, Joseph Pilates, Joseph Pilates. And she would jump up on a table and do a teaser. And, it was really shocking and very embarrassing to me. There was also, when I began to think about it much later, I remembered it. There was also this feeling of, I, I guess I was projecting what my father must have thought. In a way, I thought he had to be jealous, or she just talked about him in such a way that I thought, oh, this is, it's something. I cringed. I cringed. But he didn't. And pretty soon he started to go. And pretty soon he really got into it. He just loved it and thought it was great, made him feel good. And they both liked it. But my mother I had this chronic stiff neck, and which bothered me a lot because I'd walk funny, it hurt. I didn't like it. I was young. I shouldn't have had anything like that, but I did. So, and my mother was harping on me to, go see this Joseph Pilates. He'll fix you up. He'll fix you up. And I didn't have a great relationship with my mother at that time. Not that I had ever had, but it was particularly bad. And I thought this was all a bunch of loony stuff. They were into all kinds of offbeat, crazy stuff. And I thought this was more of that. They had time on their hands. My father didn't like to work and avoided it at all costs. And he was very successful at that. And so I just thought this was nuts. So, but finally, I couldn't stand her constantly harping on it. I said, all right, I'll go. And she made an appointment, and I went. And that is, the beginning of this whole text, so to speak. So
the rest is history.
Yeah, that's right. And the first reaction, when it's, much more detailed in the book, but the first reaction from me was, he is exactly the creepy character I thought he was. He seemed a lot older than I thought he was, and a lot, creepier. I mean, he just didn't seem like this kind of physical trainer image I had in my mind. Of course, then when I saw the gym, I thought, holy cow, this is really weird. And I am absolutely positive he looked at me and thought, oh my God, now I've got to teach this, spoiled brat kid who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth because his mother sent him, and it was like a terrible obligation. And that's what he must have seen with me. So we started off completely the wrong foot. It could have been he was just as grouchy to everybody, but I sort of felt, boy, this guy's really grouchy. He's got it in for me. But I mean, the important thing is after 10 minutes, that disappeared, just went away. And he didn't want to hear about my stiff neck. He didn't want to say hello. He didn't, ask me one question about me. He just put me right down on that reformer and made me sit 4 or 5 times till I sat in the right place, the right way. I didn't plop. I didn't, I had to sit at a certain spot, and that was it. And I'm thinking, well, all right, I've did it. I came here. I can tell my mother that this whole thing is completely nonsense. That was the first 10 minutes. But after that, uh, there was no question in my mind that something very deep, very important had happened, and it was all because of him, this creepy old character wearing shorts
Well, and I
without
think,
pants.
I know for myself, and I'm sure a lot of other teachers, we all have those clients that walk in the door for their first session and we think they're a one and done. They don't want to
Yeah.
be here. They haven't really bought into what we're doing. They don't really understand it. They're not necessarily engaged very well in that first session. But lo and behold, I mean, I know for me personally, I have clients that I've had for 20 years now that started out that way. So there's definitely something there with the work that just draws you in and keeps you coming back.
Well, that's right, and that too was one of the big hurdles I had in the book. There were two major hurdles. One, there was no biographical information about Joe, none. Uh, no letters, no nothing. I read tons of articles that he had written for Dance Magazine, for Vogue, for Vanity Fair, interviews, because during certain periods he was quite popular from the dance world, particularly. And I kept reading them, and they all were the same story, which was all right, but I didn't think much. He wasn't in the story really, and uh, so that was a major hurdle, and the other hurdle was just what you were talking about, Joanne. Why do people come back? Why do they walk in saying, this is nuts. This is crazy. I don't want to do this. It's expensive. It's time consuming. And before you know it, they've been there 20 years. And if you say to them, and I've asked so many teachers, so what is it that makes this, how does it grab people? What's in it? It's exercise. It's calisthenics of a certain kind. It's choreography for dancers. What is it? And I get a lot back. It works. Just that. It works. And when you think about that, and I kept thinking it works, but it works on what? What does it do? You could run every day and lose weight and look fit and be trim. You could do yoga. You could play golf. You could do a million things to stay exercised, to stay in shape, but you choose to do this one. And all of a sudden, so many people have chosen to do this, or they choose to teach it. So there's got to be more than it works, because that would apply to a lot of things. So what does it work on? Well, it does work on your body in a very comprehensive way. And it does work on how you move through life, how you walk, how you run, how you pick something off a high shelf, how you bend down, how you sit. Yeah, it does all that, but there's still something. And then I came across this notion of that showed up in the book by Sisten Michalia called Flow. And being in the zone, I didn't come across it. I kept thinking to myself, what was it about me? What happened to me that did it? I kept thinking, how come I went back? and I kept thinking that there was something very, very deep that gave me an hour of freedom from everything in the world. I kept saying, and then I thought, I was in some kind of zone. And then I researched being in the zone, and I came across this book by a psychologist, and I got
He's
the book.
Hungarian, right? Hungarian psychologist?
I don't know if it was Hungary. It was one of the countries over there kind of connected to Italy at the time, either Czech or Slovenia, one of the countries. It could have been Hungary, a little north, but and I read the book, and I read his history, which was shockingly similar to Joe's. He was interred in a prisoner of war camp in Italy during World War II. And he played chess to relieve his boredom and tension. And he kept referring to that in this book, which had been fairly popular in the psychological community in the 1990s. So he kept referring to that, and I kept thinking, there's so much here. And of course, I studied the book for a while. He talks about yoga in the book as being a trigger for this, what he called flow, and what I have sort of use the term being in the zone, because that's what people talk about when they see Michael Jordan, play basketball, or they see someone do something in sports, tennis. They say, wow, that guy's in the zone. It's like he's somewhere else. He's performing well beyond what anyone thinks anyone could do. And that's what I finally started to realize happens to people when they're doing Pilates. And then I started to connect that to how Joe, who knew nothing about this psychology, nevertheless understood it deep inside him. He taught it. He didn't let you take notes. He didn't let you get yourself distracted in any way. You couldn't get up and have water. You couldn't talk to anyone. No one talked to anyone. You couldn't take a break. You couldn't you just had to get in this thing and keep going, and get done and get out of there. And
that whole notion, though, let me stop you for a second. And
sure.
So that whole notion of flow and of that mind-body connection and of sort of getting so involved in what you're doing at the present moment that everything else falls away. So then you hypothesize about how he originally got started, talking about his supposed incarceration on the Isle of Man and being in this small cell, and maybe this was a workout regimen that he came up with to sort of escape his current situation, as well as to keep himself fit. So it sort of all flows together, pun intended.
Yeah. Well, that's right. I mean, once that piece, the hurdle of his biography, I had to fill in by theory, by circumstantial evidence. Well, I was a trial lawyer for years, and that's what you have to do in a trial. You have to pick the pieces that connect them and make a jury or a judge understand it. Yeah, that's what happened. And so I did that with his biography. And with this, it opened up a whole insight into how he taught and why he taught and what contrology was like and how come I was able to learn all these routines without my historical learning skills, which were based on taking notes and memorizing. And how come my body learned this and I didn't? In some sense, I'm an I in the schoolboy sense, like learning penmanship or multiplication tables. That part of me didn't learn this, but maybe Elizabeth Larkham could explain it, with the muscle memory and all of that. And it has to be a lot of that too. But by doing something, your other nervous system learns it. But he knew how to teach it. That was the clue. He knew how to get you into that zone, and being there was the attraction. Getting there, you don't consciously kind of know it, but your body needs it, and your body gets you back. And your client may come in and say, I don't want anything to do with that. That's mental in the head. But your body, once it goes through this, says, oh, hold on, get me back there. I need this. And that's what's there.
Yeah.
That's why people flock to this. And
Right.
that's why they can't articulate. Why do you go back? Oh, it works. I like it. It's fun. But they can't, they don't realize what's happened. They've left their ego-driven consciousness for
Right.
just enough time every day to feel, oh, wow, I got to get more of that. It's a drug.
It is. Yeah, I agree. Really is. All right, so let me circle back for a minute. I'd like to share with our audience kind of a fun story that you told me. So you probably see in the background, and John referred to this when we first started, but I have this wonderful photograph, that Chuck Rappaport took. So John has a story that he told me about this, and I'd like him to share that with you all.
Yeah, that's as I was up at Balanced Body. Ken Edelman has a very, very, very good library, and he has an awful lot of the litigation stuff, articles, and all that. So I was a pilot at the time, and I flew up there and spent a couple of days, and I was friendly with Ken from the lawsuit from before, and so I went up and was spending time and sitting in his little library. And then one day I walked into his office to talk to him in the afternoon, and I look up on the wall, and there's that photograph, a big poster, beautiful. Chuck's black and whites are just gorgeous. Whoops. Forget it. And, I hit something.
I can still hear you.
Okay. So I see this poster on the back wall, and I look at it for just 1 second. I said to Ken, "That's my dad." Ken says, "No, it's not your father." I said to Ken, "That's my dad in that picture." He says, no, Chuck Rappaport took this picture, and he had a friend who went up there, and that's the guy. And I said, look, I don't know about Chuck Rappaport. I never met him. And although I may have at a PMA, but I didn't think so. But that's my father. And he kept arguing with me. I said, I absolutely know what my father looks like. I know what he looks like doing Pilates. I've seen him for years. That's him. And so he says, all right, if you're sure, you're sure. And I said, yes, I am. So I said, so let's do this. Let me call up Chuck and tell him that I'm closing up my father's estate. He'd been dead for about 10 years by then. And I needed a release. The court wanted, the Circuits Court in New York wanted a release because someone had seen this picture and knew it was for sale. And so it wanted a release of this. And I particularly wanted to know if there'd been any income connected with it. And I'm just calling to see if I can get it from you. So he, Ken says, oh, okay. And Ken's got a very good sense of humor. So I said, and the first thing he's going to do, of course, is call you. And you're going to say, yes, John saw it in my office, and he was very, very moved by it, see his picture of his father, but he's also very upset. I mean, he'd never seen this picture, and here's this wonderful picture of his father. And so I gave him your number. Anyhow, that's what did happen. Chuck, when I called him, was really upset. Oh, no, it's not your father. The same thing I went through with Ken. I said, look, I mean, I don't know who you were there with or anything. I wasn't there, but I do know my father, and that is my father. And I don't want to get in any long argument with you about it. All I want is a release. And he said, well, it's not your father, so I don't have to worry. I said, it is my father. And I said, let's not get into that fight. So he said, all right, I'll check with my contact sheet and I'll look and I'll find out and I'll be back to you. And I knew I'd really bothered the living hell out of this poor guy. I mean, it was cruel. No question it was cruel, but it was one of those jokes that you just can't pass up. So anyhow, 2 days later, he does call me back. He says, John, I don't know if it's your father, but it is not Michael, who I think is the guy's name he went with. He says, and I could tell from the contact sheet, I took it at a different time. In fact, I think I was packing up and I saw it, and I took this shot. And he says, and I don't have a release, so what are you going to do to me? It was like, oh, God, he's in deep trouble. I said, well, I'm not going to do anything to you. All I want is an original. So he said, that's all you want? I said, yeah, that's all I want. I'm just having fun with you. And, I'm happy to know you and all that, but I want an original, and that's it. So that's what happened. It happened. I have in the next room, I have the original print of this. And I've been friends with Chuck ever since. I mean, he let me use one of the pictures in the book, one of his pictures. And I see him every year at PMA. He always has a table. And, we're very good friends. He loved the book. And he wrote me a very nice letter. And one day he shows up at PMA, I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And he has a tank top shirt with that on it, a black shirt with that on it. And I said, Chuck, what? You didn't even send me a shirt. You put my father's picture on a shirt and you didn't send me a shirt? And he said, I only made one. This is it. It's sort of advertising, here. And his wife, who was sitting right there, she says, give him the shirt, give him the shirt. So he takes the shirt off and he gives it to me right there. So, anyhow, that picture, I happen to love that picture, and it's become so iconic. And even when I was writing the book, and I was thinking about what I saw when I first walked into his gym, which were these 4 reformers on the wall, a guillotine, a pedipole, a Cadillac, a couple of mats, and the ladder barrel up against the window. And when, if you look at that ladder barrel, you can't help but imagine that the picture that you have on the wall, your body being bent over this thing. So I was thinking of that when I wrote the book. But
Well, it was
that's
really
the
fun
story.
for me because I had purchased this banner, obviously not knowing, hadn't read your book yet. I don't think your book was out. I've had that for a while. And then lo and behold, I'm reading your book and that picture's in there and the caption says, Joseph Pilates working with my father. So I love that. So I wanted to have you share that story because I think it's just terrific.
Well,
So that's
thank you.
great. So couple more things. So can we dig a little bit into your theories of Joseph Pilates incarcerated on the Isle of Man and kind of that story, sort of your thought process? I know you talk about it in the book, but just kind of your thought process that brought you to that theory.
Yeah. Well, if you put the pieces together like it's a puzzle, and you pull out a jigsaw puzzle, and there's a couple of things in there that don't make sense, that you pull out, like the bed springs thing, which was his story, that he used the cot springs from the Nakalo prison to develop the reformer. And you pull out the cholera, and you think to yourself, so why did he make this up? The bed springs were never used on any bed till after World War I, and certainly would not have been in a British prisoner of war camp. I mean, and I found from actually a Pilates person that lives on the Isle of Man that it's quite clear they all slept on straw mats, burlap bags filled with straw. So that was a lie. And the other lie was cholera. There was no cholera on the Isle of Man. It just happened to be one of those places that has fully escaped the epidemic. And then from reading the research of Juan Perez Pon, there's no evidence of anything he said about the Isle of Man. And then you think, well, wait a minute, there's over 4 years there unaccounted for in this man's life, a vital 4 years. And then he comes back out, goes to Germany, and he patents 2 things. One is the foot corrector or foot gizmo, I forget which of the 2. And the other is this absolutely bizarre reformer, way up high on stilts, essentially. You had to have a ladder. One picture of it does have a ladder, using weights. And he starts to do boxing when he comes out. That fails. And then he becomes a sports teacher, corrector, sports teacher, I guess. And so something happened from the time he went in, which he was a brewmaster at that time, or assistant brewmaster, the time he went to Great Britain and the time he comes out. And I'm thinking, well, what would he be doing in prison? And I recalled from my own history, representing prisoners' rights and being in prison, going into prisons for, we did class action, so you couldn't see him in a visiting room. And my co-lawyer and I would actually go back into the cells, not into any visitor areas, where we would meet with 30 or 40 prisoners, and lawyers are always very safe in prisons because that's what they need to get out. So they don't kill the lawyers, but even though Shakespeare wanted them to. And we go back, and the one thing you do notice is these guys spend all their time working out or watching television. That's the only two things they do. So yeah, maybe a few of them write or read, but and you've never seen a more muscular group of people. So I thought, well, that's what Joe didn't have TV, but he worked out. And then I thought, well, he didn't work out the way back then in, 1920 that they do now. He worked out in his room. And from that, I got to this idea that he developed a routine to exercise on his cot, on his straw mattress. And that's the floor work. And he worked at it. He studied it. He had nothing else to do. He had a very innate ability to feel the inside of his body. He felt how his muscles works. He concentrated on it. And he developed a routine for his own survival, just like Sisten Mahalia did playing chess, a routine that he completely focused on, got lost in doing these exercises. And that's why Return to Life, for example, is mat work, because that's what he did. And he did it in a confined space. And he never wanted to talk about it. He felt maybe embarrassed that this thing that he thought, was revolutionary and would change the world and all of that. He thought, yeah, if people know I developed it in prison, they're not going to pay any attention to me. So he made up these other stories and explains why he lied, and never exposed to anyone the real source of this. Made up a crazy story about bed springs, cholera added to the mystique of the exercise being a cure-all for everything. And that's what he did. And, that's my theory. Nobody is going to just say I'm wrong about it, because there's no one was there. And I think it's a good theory. And I think it helps you understand his reaction to animals in the zoo, which I write about. It helps you understand his feeling that modern life, apartment life, which is the life he led, except for his house in the Berkshires, but apartment life and the stress of apartment life, he can equate that to prison and must have had that in his mind. So that's how I got there. And, it was one of those, oh, eureka, ha ha, I think I got it moments. Yeah. And it still makes a lot of sense to me. And I have no trouble when I do a routine thinking, yeah, you could do this in jail. This is what you could do. And we are, in many ways, now back
Right?
in jail.
Right?
Yeah. So here you
Very
go.
true. Terrific. Well, thank you so much. I love the book. I can't recommend it highly enough. If you have not laid your hands on a copy yet, do so. Read it at least once. You'll want to read it again, promise. And I really appreciate you spending this time with us today, John. It's been a pleasure.
Well, you know how happy and honored I really am about this. I mean, it's a wonderful feeling from my side that people do like the book, that I feel really good about that. And I feel really, I didn't realize that I was there all along until I wrote about it. And I didn't have much feeling about it, really. I mean, I just sort of did it. But from the time that Kevin Bowen brought me down to PMA in 2007, from that time, I thought, well, I did have something to do with this. It's very gratifying, deeply, deeply gratifying. And it's great to see what actually came of it. If I win a case, yeah, if I win, my clients are really happy and we go out, we have a big dinner, drink a little too much and have a good time. And 4 days later, I'm off on something else. And yeah, it's a nice feeling, but it's nowhere near the feeling of seeing at the last PMA, what did we have, close to 10,000 people there? I mean, and I think, I had something to do with that. And look how many people they're helping, and look how many people they're making happy and better lives and healthier lives. And look how many people are even employed. If you're, an economic liberal or something, well, look at what Ken's done with his business and his family, and how he's brought American manufacturing all over the world. Look at all that. And it all had to do with me sort of being there. So let me tell you, that's a pretty heavy, nice feeling to kind of walk around with. And,
much gratitude to you from all of us, from our whole community. And I know I'm not alone in saying that you are just an inspiration, and it's just wonderful. Keep on doing what you're doing.
I'm trying. Got a reformer, so that's what you too. I mean, you've got to be gratifying with what you do, and well, it's wonderful. It's a great thing to be involved with. Thanks, Joanne, for the opportunity.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.